So hi everybody, and today's topic of discussion is Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management Solution. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity, we often think about hackers outside the organizations trying to access private or sensitive data, right? But in reality, threats from insiders are becoming a universal concern across all the industries, including state and local government. Now, as per a Verizon 2021 report, it says that more than 93% of organizations are concerned about insider risks. And more than 20% of security breaches are due to internal actors. Now, with the work environment drastically changing in past 2 years because of remote or hybrid work and BYOD scenarios, these numbers have in fact increased. Also, as per this report, it takes an average of 85 days to contain an insider incident. And organizations may end up spending millions of dollars per incident. This is because the nature of insider risks can make them particularly hard to track and investigate. Now, to add to all this, there is a great resignation that's going on, right? And also war with Ukraine. So our state and local government customers may want to rethink how they want to keep their agency data safe, particularly from insiders. When we say insider, we are talking about employees within the agencies or contractors or subcontractors or vendors who have access to devices and data within the organization. Now, insider threats can be caused because of malicious, deliberate, or disgruntled insiders who have intentions of stealing data for financial or other gains. And insider threats could also be caused intentionally by careless or negligent insiders. Interestingly, inadvertent insider threats are as prevalent as malicious insider threats. Some examples of insider risks for state and local government customers are compliance policy violations, confidentiality or security violations, then sabotage, conflicts of interest, there could be fraud or espionage, then workplace harassment, or employees using offensive language, and so on. Now, many of these stem from two specific areas of risk. One is data theft by departing employees, and then there could be data leakage, which is both malicious and inadvertent. It is very important that organizations focus on leading indicators that might proactively identify the insider risks days or months before it turns out into an insider threat. In fact, insider risk management should really be a part of zero trust approach for protecting your data and communications. And you can detect risks in advance and mitigate them in the early stages itself. Now, when we talk about data exposure, most of our customers are aware of data loss prevention solutions, and some of our customers are already using Microsoft DLP solution. Now, DLP protects users from data leakage risks through policy tips and also by blocking the copying of sensitive information. But DLP is very transactional and it may not show you the bigger picture. We should note that data doesn't move itself, right? People move the data. So it's not just about detecting something bad has happened, but we also need to establish the context around it. So organizations need solutions over and above DLP that can collect signal from various sources and correlate them over a period of time with artificial intelligence and machine learning so that it can show you the insider risk. Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal provides various solutions for managing insider risks. So first we have this insider risk management solution, which helps you identify and act on malicious and inadvertent user activities. And then we have communication compliance solution that helps you detect code of conduct violations or risky communications. And then there's information barriers that can prevent any conflict of interest scenarios. I'll be showing you the capabilities of insider risk management solution. And my colleague Leo will cover communication compliance and information barrier capabilities later on. Insider risk management solution helps you quickly identify and act on insider risks. And once insider risks are identified, they can be mitigated through an integrated investigations workflow. Your IT admins can create the policies, while your security teams can monitor the insider risks, and they can collaborate with your HR and legal teams for mitigating the risks as soon as possible. The cool thing here is you don't need to deploy any endpoint agents to collect the signals. It's all built into Windows 10, and you will also be creating policies in the cloud, which reduces any management overhead and does not affect your end users' productivity. And this solution also uses a privacy-first approach. So all the usernames will be anonymized in order to prevent any bias and also maintain the privacy. Insider risk management provides various templates where you can define the type of risk activities that you want to detect and investigate. And each policy template is based on specific indicators, and you can configure various thresholds that make sense for your organization. It can correlate signals from various sources and solutions. So for example, it can ingest signals from DLP policy violations and also from your end user devices, especially if the user is copying sensitive information to USB or their personal cloud drive and so on. It can also correlate activities that are taking place on sensitive information or content that has sensitivity labels on them. Then it can correlate audit logs in order to highlight any sequence of events like mass downloading content from SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business, then exfiltrating information or oversharing content from SharePoint Online, mass downgrading the labels from documents, and so on. You can also integrate with various connectors like HR systems or performance review tools that can send employee termination dates or performance improvement plan related details. This could then be used to detect any departing employee or disgruntled employee related risks. If your organization has a physical badging system that monitors physical access to company buildings or data centers or server rooms, you can import this data into insider risk management solution, and you can correlate the physical access information with other risk activities within this tool. Then you can create communication compliance policies to monitor regulatory compliance, workplace violence or harassment, or offensive language inside your Microsoft 365 as well as in your third-party SaaS apps. And then you can correlate information from Azure AD sign-in logs and also from Microsoft Defender for cloud apps. So if there are any user anomalies like impossible travel or activity from anonymous IP addresses, etc., it will correlate the signals with the user's activity in order to highlight the risk. Now, all these connectors and solutions are not mandatory to be configured. You can get started with insider risk management with just the audit logs turned on. But the more data it has from these connectors, the better it can correlate and provide you with insider risk insights. Let's now consider a scenario and see how insider risk management works. Let's say an employee enters resignation date in the HR tool. Now this signal comes from the HR connector, and it creates a trigger to start looking back 90 days. And it also looks forward 30 days and scores the activities based on the thresholds that you have chosen. Now, a few days before the resignation, the user has downloaded several files from OneDrive for Business. Now, several of the downloaded files were sensitive. Some of them had account numbers, then US credit card numbers. Some files were labeled as strictly confidential through information protection as well. Now, next, this user downloads important project-related files from Teams. Then he renames the file to summer.zip and then emails that to their personal email address. So this sequence of events definitely looks suspicious, right? So using this tool, you can continue to track activities to determine if this is likely an insider risk case and if it's a cause for concern. So next thing you notice is this user is accessing SharePoint and sharing several files with their personal email domain. Again, some files were labeled as strictly confidential. And then using the corporate device that is managed and onboarded to compliance portal or Defender for endpoint, we can see that many of the confidential files were also copied to USB. And then the last thing they do is download malicious software onto the machine. So this is clearly a security policy violation. Now, insider risk management solution will give a high risk score to this user, and it will highlight this user as insider risk so that you can immediately start mitigating this risk. Insider risk management provides you with a built-in workflow that helps you collaborate between different teams so that you can identify and resolve the risks as soon as possible. So here your IT teams can create the insider risk policies. Then your system will generate alerts for insider risks. Your security operations teams can then triage the alerts and then they can create cases for further investigation. Then your HR or legal teams can deeply investigate the risk and take proper actions to mitigate the risk. So now let's see this workflow in action. We'll see a demo for insider risk management solution. So for this, first let's go to the Purview Compliance portal. There are several granular role-based access control groups that are available for various actions within this insider risk management portal. Now, since insider risk management solution requires collaboration between your IT teams, security, HR, and legal teams, you can assign these users to specific role groups here. Now, all the actions taken by various teams are fully auditable and they are available in your compliance portal audit logs. You can find the insider risk management solution over here inside the Purview Compliance portal. Most organizations would probably want to start by understanding and quantifying the level of insider risks that they have in their organization. So for that, you can get started with insider risk analytics. With just one G5 compliance license or a compliance trial account, you can turn on the insider risk analytics. This will conduct an evaluation of potential insider risks in your entire organization, even before you start configuring any insider risk policies. Once you turn this on, it starts generating insights and it creates a detailed report for you within 48 hours. So now your risk officers or risk admins can check the insights for the organization. So here we give you an aggregated view of anonymized user activities, and you can see insights on what percentage of users are performing potential data leak activities or potential data theft activities, and what are the top exfiltration activities that are done by users. So example here, you can see the percentage of users that are copying files to USB, that are sharing content externally, downloading files from SharePoint, and also performing risky sequence of activities. Then we can also dig into the next level of details into this data leak activities. So example, around 1.3% of users may have performed exfiltration activities. It also says around 0.4% of users copied sensitive content to personal cloud, and 0.2% users are copying content to USB. Now notice that the percentage of risky activity seems low in this case, right? And that's typically because there's a small percentage of people that are doing something that they shouldn't. But this small percentage of people can lead to potential insider threats. So that being said, what analytics does is to help you assess the risk profile of your entire user base and then quickly see where you may have issues so that you can get to managing those risks as soon as possible. Now, before starting to create the policies, you can configure the settings that will apply to all your insider risk management policies. For example, here you can see privacy settings. You can anonymize the versions of username in order to maintain privacy of the users. Then here you can granularly choose the indicators that you want to investigate in your policy templates. For example, you can choose one or more office indicators, then you can choose device indicators and also physical access indicators. Very soon, our government customers will also be able to configure security policy violation indicators and Microsoft Cloud App security indicators as well. There are also several other settings here, like you can choose policy time frame for investigating insider risks. You can also export your insider risk alerts to your SIEM system. Then you can also set up priority users and priority assets that might need a closer inspection and more sensitive risk scoring as well. And then we also provide capability to enable Power Automate flows in order to automate certain tasks. So example, you can notify the manager when a user has an insider risk alert, or you can maybe create an incident for insider risk in your ServiceNow tool. So next, your IT admin or IT team can start creating insider risk management policies. So here you can click on this create a policy. For government community cloud tenants or GCC tenants, we have data theft by departing users and data leak templates that are available. Additional templates will be available to your GCC tenants by July 2022. Now, all these templates will have a triggering event that will start assigning risk scores to user activity. And you can also later select indicators that will let you define which user activities you want to monitor for this policy. So example here, if you have already created DLP policy, you can use a DLP policy match as one of the triggering event for this policy. You can also optionally set up HR connectors to import any resignation dates or performance appraisal related dates as well. So for the sake of this demo, I am going to select the general data leaks template. I'm going to give it a name. And then we can specify the users and groups within the organization to whom this policy will apply to. You can also choose important SharePoint sites that can be prioritized for this policy. Example, you can prioritize somebody mass downloading files from an important SharePoint site over mass downloading from some low priority SharePoint sites. You can also prioritize content that contains specific sensitive information type. Example, activities on content that contains SSN or credit card numbers can be provided a higher risk score. You can also prioritize content that contains a specific sensitivity label. So example, content that is marked as highly confidential can be monitored closely and provided a higher risk score. If you want to prioritize any specific file extensions, that feature is available as well. Next, you can choose your triggering event that will start assigning risk score to user activities. So example, trigger this policy when there is a DLP policy match or when user performs certain exfiltration activities. You can also define trigger thresholds for each of these exfiltration activities. Then here you can choose the policy indicators to be monitored, like example, office indicators or device indicators, indicators from cloud app security, physical access indicators, and so on. And we also provide you the capabilities to define thresholds for each of these indicators. Then next, you can submit this policy. Now, once the policies are created, it will start generating the alerts. And here you can also see the severity of the alert. So notice that we have anonymized the usernames here in order to maintain the privacy and also prevent any conflicts of interest or bias during investigation, especially if you see an alert generated for your friend or colleague. Then your SecOps teams can start triaging these alerts and investigate them. So let me click on this alert here so that we can investigate it further. So I can see the event that caused this user to come in scope for a policy. And in this case, the user has submitted the resignation. I can clearly see the activity that generated this alert and also the cumulative exfiltration activities by this user compared to the organization median. Then additionally, you can also see what kind of sensitive information are they exfiltrating and to which domains they are exfiltrating it to. So example, this user has exfiltrated several highly confidential files with several SSN numbers to their personal outlook.com email. So this definitely does not look good, right? So now we can triage this alert and we can confirm this alert into an insider risk case for further investigation. Now let's go to a case that has already been created. So now your HR team or other investigation team can perform a detailed investigation. So here, if we click on this user activity tab, on the left hand side, we can see the detailed list of activities for this user over the last 3 months with their associated risk scores. This user activity view here gives me a quick snapshot of various indicators that are based on the triggering event. I can also click on this visual here to see the details of each activity. So you can see the sequence of events also here identified with this user right before they submitted their resignation. So it clearly tells me that they did some collection of files from SharePoint. So files were downloaded from SharePoint. And it also looks like the files contain sensitive information like credit cards. Then next, they performed obfuscation activities, like files were renamed. And again, those files contain sensitive information. Then some of the files were printed. So it's an exfiltration activity. Again, all those contain credit card numbers. And then finally, looks like this user erased their tracks by deleting certain files. Again, all these activities are being performed close to their resignation date and their employment end date, which shows some sort of malicious intent. Now, on their own, these activities may not raise an alert, but with sequence detection, we have full context of what is happening. Then we also have other workflows and tools that are built in. So example here, there is case notes. So it looks like HR team has already evaluated this case. So clearly this looks like an insider risk and it could become an insider threat. So it needs immediate attention. So the investigator can now start mitigating the risks via different actions. So example, you can escalate this for further investigation. So this will collect all the evidence and create an e-discovery case automatically, which your legal teams can then quickly review. Now, this will help your legal teams to start preserving the evidence and prepare for law and enforcement escalation. This is important because the hardest part of e-discovery is the discovery bit itself. The end-to-end nature of this solution will help you start with all the necessary evidence and then bring all the stakeholders together. When through Power Apps automation, you can notify the manager of insider risk for this user, or you can also open a ServiceNow incident. You can also quickly create a Microsoft Teams here to collaborate between various investigators of this case. Then finally, after the investigation, you can check the username for this user by removing the anonymization. So this was an overview of insider risk management solution. So to summarize, insider risk management is all about accelerating time to action, then presenting the right information in the right context so that you can make an effective decision to reduce your insider threat. Now, Leo, I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can show the capabilities of other insider risk solutions like communication compliance and information barrier. Over to you.
Hey, BB, thank you. Leo, before you get started, BB, some of our attendees have reported that they cannot see the poll questions. While Leo gets started, is there a way for you to repost those poll questions?
Yeah, sure, I will do that.
Great, thank you so much. Leo, it's all yours.
Thank you for that excellent presentation, BB, and demo. Can you see my slide?
I cannot.
No.
Let me try to reshare that. All right. You see now?
See it now. Thanks, Leo.
Okay. All right. So I think by nature, all organizations are trying to foster a safe work environment where employees, they're not feeling harassed, threatened, and all communications are compliant. However, as we see here, there's some challenges when it comes to detecting communication violations. There's so many communication channels and organizations that are collaborating with customers, partners, contractors, all of this across different mediums. And while increased collaboration is beneficial for everyone, the volume of data that's being generated with these communications is increasing the potential for violations. It's really exponential. So not only do you have to worry about email, but you have text messages, you have chat feeds, tweets, and many others. Now, some of the processes that organizations are using today to look for these violations, it's often very intensive, it's manual, and it can involve multiple people from different teams. Now, to add to this, you also have a rise in regulatory requirements. All of these factors together is really increasing the effort that it takes to review potential violations and the experts that are needed, which quite frankly, they're far and few between. They're hard to find. So what ends up happening? These violations end up slipping through the cracks, and this can have a negative impact for compliance reasons, an organization's credibility, and obviously company culture. So while many organizations, they do have an employee handbook that has detailed code of conduct policies, in many cases, this means, they're preventing things like, they're trying to prevent things like anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, and sharing of adult content. This is just an example of what could happen. Here, a user shares an internal email that has an offensive image in it, but this inadvertently gets shared across teams, across email to multiple users. What's the end result? A sexual harassment case. The sad part about this is this can, and it does happen, but it can also be prevented. Here's how Microsoft Purview Communication Compliance can help. The solution helps minimize communication risk by helping you detect, capture, and take remediation actions on inappropriate messages, like we've seen on the previous slide. It also works by providing you with predefined templates that you can use for policies, but you can also create a customizable playbook. Reviewers, they can investigate email, they can investigate Microsoft Teams communications, Yammer communications, and even third-party communications. And by the way, privacy is built in. You can configure a setting to anonymize users to prevent things like bias and protect the user's privacy. This is what the workflow looks like in communication compliance. You can configure policies, then you can investigate, and then remediate all of this with the communication channels that you're monitoring. Let's jump into a demo. So you get to communication compliance the same way you get to insider risk management that Bibi showed you. You need to go to the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal, compliance.microsoft.com. And one might think that being a global admin will gain you access to the solution. You actually need to have one of the permissions that you'll find in the permissions tab under Microsoft Purview Solutions and then roles. You need to be a member of one of the related role-based access groups. And there's 4 of them. Communication compliance administrators. These can create, modify policies and global settings. The analysts, they can investigate policy matches and view metadata items and take remediation actions. Whereas the investigators, they can do everything an analyst can do, but they can also view message content. And obviously viewers, they can only view reports and widgets. Let's go to the catalog. Within the solution catalog, we see that communication compliance solution is within the insider risk management pillar section. This is where we find another solution called information barriers that we'll be discussing shortly. Let's click into the solution. Here we see that I've already created some policies that are currently active. We can also see that I have some pending items that are for review. But let's walk through the process of creating a policy so you can see what it's all about. Click on create a policy. There's several options that can help you get started depending on your use case. So if you're looking to detect things like inappropriate text or images, you have templates for that, or monitor for sensitive information, regulatory compliance, or even conflicts of interest. Let's go ahead and create a policy for detecting inappropriate text. This is where we can choose the scope of the policy to either all users or selected users and groups. We can also choose who's going to be a reviewer in this case. And this can be someone that was previously defined in one of the role-based access groups for communication compliance that we just saw. We're going to choose a user named Bruce to be a reviewer. This template has some of the pre-filled for monitor communication channels for us, like Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, Skype, and Yammer. But let's customize this policy to see some other options. We have an option to exclude certain users and groups. Now, there may be scenarios where you don't want to monitor a certain person that's within the all users scope. We can also see the reviewer that I just added. I'm going to click next. This is where we can choose the locations. Now, these locations were already predefined in the template, but we can certainly uncheck any of these. But notice Exchange, which is email, Teams, option for Skype, and Yammer. But notice here below, we also have options for non-Microsoft applications. Now, in my tenant, I've added some third-party connectors that I'm using to import messages from telemessage, enterprise number archiver, and also WhatsApp. Now, this helps you extend your supervision reach to catch violations that may be happening outside of Microsoft. Click next. Now, the direction of communications can be monitored in 3 ways. You have inbound. This is going to detect communications sent to supervised users from external users and internal senders. Then you have outbound, which is going to detect communications that are sent from supervised users in the policy to external and internal recipients. And then internal is going to detect communications between supervised users or groups in this policy. This policy is pre-configured to monitor for things like targeted harassment, threat, and discrimination. But we can add other classifiers and other sensitive information types that we may have customized for things like maybe offensive keywords or anything we want to monitor in communications. Scrolling down, some of the other options we can configure are like OCR. OCR is a capability that we provide that can help extract text from images that might be embedded in picture files and then shared in email or Teams chats. So, for example, if a user puts an image file that may contain foul language or threatening language in a chat message, this can be detected and monitored in communication compliance. We can also either review all items that are matched, default's 100%, but you can scale this back, and just in case you don't want to catch everything or monitor everything, just a certain percentage, so you're not overwhelming the reviewer. So you can review the policy and then create it. But let's go through some of the investigation and remediation actions. New policies, they can take about 24 hours before you start getting alerts. And once you start getting alerts, you can easily see which policies are getting hits. Again, I have some pending items for review in these two policies. Let's click into this offensive or threatening language policy. On the overview tab, I can get some high level details like users that are getting the most policy matches or age of some of these pending items. Looks like I've recently had 9 things that came in. Over on the pending items tab, I can get even more details about emails in chats that may have some offensive language in them. Let's go ahead and click into one of them. Here we see that a user named Grady is communicating with an external user in a Teams message, and he's obviously using some strong words. I hate you, moron. Clicking on the plain text, we see that the keywords, there's some keywords here that they're highlighted. And this is because in this particular policy, I've created a custom, I've added a custom sensitive information type that is looking for these words. If we click over to Conversation tab, we get even more details about this back and forth communication. We see that Grady is persistent in offending this external user. So here in this section, we see that the reviewer or the investigator can do a number of things. They can either consider this resolved. This is going to move it over to the Resolve tab. They can notify the user, and the user is going to get a notification, which we see shortly. We can also tag this message. Now, I've already tagged this message as non-compliant for obvious reasons. We can also escalate this particular pending item, and this is going to send it to another reviewer that's been added to this policy. There's also an option to escalate for investigation. And similar to what you saw in BB's presentation in Insider Risk Management, had the option to escalate to an e-discovery premium case. You get that same option with communication compliance. So for this particular message, we're going to go ahead and notify Grady. So you can configure notification templates, and these can be customized by communication compliance administrators and investigators. Once I click on send, Grady's going to get this message in his inbox, letting him know that he's violated company policy. Some of the other options we have for investigation and remediation include creating a Power Automate flow. And you can do things like notify users manager for this message that has been detected. We can also download the item in its native file format. But I really like this feature here. An investigator or an administrator can delete this item so that it gets removed from the Teams chat. So let's click on Teams to see. As we see here, the message is going to be deleted and replaced with a policy tip. And this is going to be visible to the sender and the recipient, letting them know that this has been removed because of violating or having some sensitive content. Now let's head over to the reports section to see some more details. This is a dashboard that provides an investigator or an auditor with some high-level details like recent policy matches, resolved items, policies with the most matches, but we can also see how many policies have had escalations. Now, if we scroll down, there's a detailed reports section where you can see things like policy setting and status, items per location, and items and actions per location. I like this one. Let's click in the details here. So here, this is giving us a nice breakdown of how many items were matched in Teams and in email, along with some of the investigation and remediation actions that have been taken. This is a really great report along with other reports, but this is just communication compliance. So far, we've seen how we can monitor communications, how we can take actions and remediate communications. But how do you prevent communications from happening between different users? For this, we have the information barrier solution also within the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. But let's take a look at a slide to see how it works. This is a typical use case for information barriers. There's usually two different groups or departments that you want to prevent from communicating with each other. So information barriers works in two ways. You can either block these groups from communicating with each other, or you can allow one group to only communicate with another group. So for SLG customers, I can see a good use case for this. Many of you are in a shared tenant. So there may be scenarios where you want maybe the Department of Finance not to be able to communicate with the legal department. Let's go into the into the compliance portal so you can see how this works. Or before we get there, I want to show you some of the activities that can be prevented. These are some things that you can prevent in Teams. Searching for a user. If a policy is configured to block this activity, you can also prevent users from adding members to a team, starting a chat session, starting a group chat, or inviting someone to join a meeting, sharing a call, or even placing a call. We're going to get into the demo. First, we're going to see the admin perspective, and then we're going to see the end user perspective. So surprisingly, as you saw before, information barriers is right next to the communication compliance solution. Let's click in. Before you create policies, you have to define segments. Segments are essentially defined using a selected user attribute in Azure Active Directory. Now, for the sake of this demo, I've already created two segments based on the department attribute in Azure AD. One segment is for the finance department, and the other segment is for the legal department. These segments are going to query and scope all users that have the finance and the legal department attribute. Once you have these defined, the next step is to create policies. Let's click on policies. Notice we have 2 policies that are created. This is because, as I mentioned earlier, policies are only one way. One policy is created to block finance from communicating with legal, and the other policies created to prevent legal from communicating in Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive with finance. Previously, this all had to be done in PowerShell. This new user portal is recent, so made things a lot easier. But let's see what it looks like for a finance user who used to be able to communicate with somebody in the legal department. Here we can see a user named Alex. He can no longer communicate with Grady. It's because Alex is in the Department of Finance and Grady's in legal. And once that information barrier policy has been created and is set to active, Alex can no longer communicate with Grady. Notice this message that he gets in this existing chat message. Administrator has disabled this chat message. Along with this, Alex is not going to be able to call Grady or any other user that he's never chatted with in the legal department. He won't even be able to search for that user. Let's move over to Grady's computer. Once again, we see Grady, who's in the legal department, trying to communicate with Alex, looking at a previous message before this policy was enforced. And again, he as well gets that message. Administrator has disabled chat for this user. Just like Alex, Grady's not going to be able to call any other finance department user or be able to search for that user. With that, I hope you've learned something valuable you can use with communication compliance and information barriers. I'll now hand it back over to BB and Barry.
Leo, thank you